March 6, 1940, 14:20 hours, Kollaa River, Finland. Corporal Simo Häyhä lay motionless in the snow, his white camouflage making him invisible against the frozen landscape. For the past 98 days, the 34-year-old Finnish farmer had been hunting Soviet soldiers with methodical precision. His score stood at 504 confirmed kills, one short of a number that would make him the deadliest sniper in military history. Through his iron sights, Häyhä tracked a Soviet patrol moving through the pine forest 150 meters away. The soldiers were bundled in dark coats that made them stand out like ink stains against the white snow. They had no idea death was watching them. At 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighing barely 140 pounds, Häyhä looked nothing like a killing machine. He was quiet, mild-mannered, a farmer who had spent his life hunting birds in the Finnish wilderness. But the Winter War had transformed this humble man into something the Red Army called Belaya Smert, the White Death. Häyhä squeezed the trigger of his Finnish Mosin-Nagant M28-30. The Soviet soldier dropped instantly, kill number 505. Moments later, an explosive bullet fired by a Soviet counter-sniper struck Häyhä in the left jaw, nearly tearing his face apart. As he lay bleeding in the snow, the man who had terrorized 500,000 Soviet troops for over 3 months finally fell silent. But the legend of the White Death was just beginning. What happened during those 98 days of combat would prove that in warfare, it's not always the biggest army that wins. Sometimes it's the man who knows the forest better than anyone else alive. Simo Häyhä was born on December 17, 1905, in the small Finnish municipality of Rautjärvi, just miles from the Russian border. His family were Lutheran farmers who scratched out a living from the harsh Nordic soil. Simo was the 7th of 8 children, a quiet boy who preferred the company of trees and animals to people. The landscape that shaped Häyhä was unforgiving. Winters lasted 8 months, temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow could pile 10 feet deep. Most of the year, daylight lasted only a few hours. It was a place that either killed you or made you extraordinarily tough. From an early age, Häyhä showed a natural talent for shooting. His father taught him to hunt using an old bolt-action rifle, stalking game birds through the dense pine forests that covered southeastern Finland. These birds were incredibly skittish. Any sound or sudden movement would send them exploding into flight. Hunting them required infinite patience, perfect stillness, and the ability to make every shot count. The skills Häyhä developed hunting forest birds would prove directly applicable to hunting human targets. Capercaillie, black grouse, and ptarmigan were among the most challenging quarry in Finland. They possessed acute hearing, sharp eyesight, and lightning-fast reflexes. A hunter needed to approach within range without making the slightest noise, account for wind drift and bullet drop, and fire with absolute precision because there was rarely a second chance. Häyhä's father taught him to estimate distances by studying how large familiar objects appeared at different ranges. A pine tree that looked a certain size at 100 meters would appear proportionally smaller at 200 meters. A bird that filled the front sight post was at one distance. A bird half that size was twice as far away. These lessons required no expensive equipment or advanced technology, just observation, experience, and mathematical understanding. Winter hunting was especially challenging. Snow changed the acoustics of the forest, making some sounds carry farther while muffling others. Wind patterns shifted unpredictably through the trees. Cold metal could burn exposed skin, and frozen mechanisms might fail at the worst possible moment. But winter also provided advantages for those who understood it. Tracks were visible in snow, revealing animal movement patterns. Sound carried differently, sometimes allowing a hunter to locate prey by hearing alone. And the harsh conditions meant fewer competing hunters in the forest. By age 17, Häyhä had joined the Suojeluskunta, Finland's voluntary civil guard. The organization had been formed in 1917 after Finland's declaration of independence, preparing young men for military service while fostering patriotic values. Häyhä quickly gained a reputation as an exceptional marksman, winning shooting competition after shooting competition across the Viipuri province. His home reportedly filled with trophies, though the modest young man always stood at the back during group photographs. The Civil Guard competitions were demanding. Shooters faced multiple stages requiring different skills: precision shooting at known distances, rapid fire at moving targets, shooting from various positions including prone, kneeling, and standing. The courses tested not just marksmanship, but the ability to perform under pressure, adapt to changing conditions, and maintain concentration over long periods. In 1925, Häyhä completed his mandatory military service with the Finnish Army's Bicycle Battalion. He learned military tactics and discipline, but more importantly, he refined his already impressive shooting skills. Using a standard-issue Mosin Nagant rifle, he could hit a target 16 times in a row from 150 meters in under a minute. For a bolt-action rifle that required manual chambering between shots, this was extraordinary marksmanship. After completing his service, Häyhä returned to farming and hunting. He lived a simple life, working his family's land, competing in local ski races, and spending countless hours in the forest perfecting his understanding of wind, weather, and terrain. He never imagined that these peaceful skills would soon make him the most feared sniper in military history. In 1938, with tensions rising between Finland and the Soviet Union, Häyhä received formal sniper training at a military facility in Uti. The course taught him advanced techniques for estimating distances, reading weather conditions, and remaining concealed in hostile territory. According to his instructors, Häyhä could estimate distances up to 150 meters within a margin of error of just 1 meter. But no amount of training could have prepared anyone for what was coming. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with overwhelming force. Operation Barbarossa wouldn't begin for another year and a half, but Stalin had decided to secure his northern flank by annexing the small Nordic country that had once been part of the Russian Empire. The numbers were staggering. The Red Army committed 750,000 troops, supported by 6,000 tanks and 3,000 aircraft. Finland could muster just 300,000 soldiers with a handful of tanks and barely 100 planes. It should have been over in weeks. But Stalin had miscalculated. His massive army was designed for sweeping advances across open terrain, not for fighting in the dense forests and swamps of Finland during the worst winter in decades. Soviet soldiers were issued brown uniforms that made them visible targets against the snow. They had no experience with extreme cold warfare, and they had never faced an enemy that knew every tree, every hill, every frozen stream in the battle zone. Häyhä was assigned to the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, commanded by Lieutenant Arne Jutelainen. Their sector was the Kollaa River, north of Lake Ladoga, where Soviet forces were attempting to break through Finnish defensive lines and drive toward the interior of the country. The terrain was perfect for a sniper. Dense pine forests provided natural concealment. Rocky outcroppings offered elevated firing positions. Most importantly, the snow was deep enough to allow a man to disappear completely if he knew how to use it. Häyhä's equipment was simple but effective. He carried a Finnish-produced Mosin Nagant M28-30 rifle, chambered for the 7.621 53R cartridge. The weapon was shorter and heavier than standard Russian Mosin Nagants, with a high-quality barrel that maintained accuracy in extreme cold. Unlike many snipers, Häyhä refused to use telescopic sights, preferring iron sights that were less likely to fog up or reflect sunlight that might give away his position. His tactics were equally straightforward. Each morning before dawn, Häyhä would move to a carefully selected firing position. He would build a snow hide that made him completely invisible, sometimes lying motionless for hours waiting for targets to appear. He carried snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from creating visible vapor that might betray his location. When Soviet patrols entered his kill zone, Häyhä would select his targets with methodical precision. Officers first, then machine gunners, then anyone who looked like they might be carrying important equipment. One shot, one kill, then complete stillness until the next opportunity presented itself. The psychological effect was devastating. Soviet soldiers began to understand that any movement in daylight could be fatal. Entire companies would refuse to advance through areas where the White Death was known to operate. Reports filtered back to Red Army headquarters about a ghost sniper who could kill from impossible distances and then vanish without a trace. Soviet commanders responded by sending their own snipers to hunt Häyhä. Counter-sniper teams scoured the forests around Kollaa, trying to locate and eliminate the Finnish marksman who was terrorizing their troops. They failed repeatedly. Häyhä's intimate knowledge of the terrain, combined with his supernatural patience, made him virtually untouchable. By Christmas 1939, Häyhä had killed over 150 Soviet soldiers. By mid-January, his tally had reached 200. Soviet soldiers began calling him Belaya Smert, the White Death, a name that spread through the Red Army like a disease. The Finnish media seized on Häyhä's success, turning him into a propaganda symbol of Finnish resistance. Newspapers ran stories about the mysterious sniper who was single-handedly holding off the Soviet invasion. To the Finnish people, Häyhä became larger than life, a guardian spirit who materialized from the snow to protect their homeland. In February 1940, Swedish businessman donated a precision rifle to Häyhä in recognition of his extraordinary service. Colonel Svensson himself presented the weapon to the now famous sniper during a brief ceremony behind the lines. But Häyhä continued using his trusted M28-30, the rifle he had trained with for years and knew better than any other weapon. The numbers continued climbing: 250 kills, 300 kills, 400 kills. Soviet soldiers began to believe they were fighting something supernatural, a force of nature that couldn't be killed or captured. As February turned to March, it became clear that the Winter War was nearing its end. The Soviet Union had paid an enormous price for its invasion. Estimates suggest between 130,000 and 250,000 Red Army casualties, but sheer numbers were finally beginning to tell. Finland could not sustain its losses indefinitely. Häyhä continued hunting until the very end. On March 6, 1940, he was lying in his usual position along the Kollaa River when a Soviet soldier armed with an explosive bullet finally got lucky. The round struck Häyhä in the lower left jaw, nearly tearing his face apart and leaving him in a coma for 11 days. When he finally regained consciousness on March 13th, the Winter War was over. Finland had signed a peace treaty that ceded significant territory to the Soviet Union, but the country had maintained its independence. The David versus Goliath struggle had ended with the smaller nation bloodied but unbowed. Häyhä's final tally was 505 confirmed sniper kills, the highest number recorded by any sniper in any major war. Additionally, he was credited with approximately 200 kills using submachine guns during infantry actions, bringing his total to over 700 enemy soldiers eliminated in just 98 days of combat. The recovery from his facial wounds took years. Häyhä underwent multiple surgeries to reconstruct his shattered jaw, and his face bore permanent scars that made him almost unrecognizable. He was promoted to second lieutenant by Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, the highest rank in the Finnish army at the time, in recognition of his extraordinary service. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Häyhä wanted to return to combat, but his injuries were too severe. Instead, he returned to farming and hunting, living quietly in the town of Ruokolahti. He became successful as a moose hunter and dog breeder, often hunting with Finnish President Urho Kekkonen. Despite his legendary status, Häyhä remained modest about his wartime achievements. He rarely spoke of his experiences and avoided publicity whenever possible. When asked in 1998 how he had become such an effective sniper, he replied simply, "Practice." In a 2001 interview, shortly before his 96th birthday, Häyhä was asked if he felt remorse for killing so many people. His answer captured the essence of his character. "I did what I was told to do as well as I could. There would be no Finland unless everyone had done the same." Simo Häyhä died peacefully in 2002 at a veterans' nursing home, surrounded by the respect and gratitude of his countrymen. He had lived to see Finland become a prosperous, independent nation, the country he had helped save with his rifle and his courage. The man the Soviets called the White Death had proven that in warfare, technology and numbers don't always determine the outcome. Sometimes it comes down to one determined individual who knows his ground, trusts his equipment, and refuses to give up when everything seems hopeless. On March the 6th, 1940, Simo Häyhä fired his final shot as a sniper. But his legacy lived on in every Finnish soldier who learned that courage and skill could triumph over overwhelming odds, and in the understanding that the quietest men sometimes cast the longest shadows. The farmer who became a legend had shown the world what one person could accomplish when fighting for something worth dying for.